So, hello, Ploi.
Hello, everyone. We were tested before, so we're all safe in here. First, again, more thank you. Thank you for all being here, for selling out, managing to snag a ticket to this hot debut. And for braving the hottest day in San Francisco to come out to be here. Thank you, Evan, and the Booksmith staff, and everybody who helps make this place a wonderful place to come read. And also to Kate for considering me worthy enough to be the literary midwife to usher this baby into the world. We're all here, if you haven't heard already, for the blots. Those infamous, handsome, artificial men dispatched by Russian hackers to steal our data, featured in the title story out there. Side note, if we weren't at capacity, I would have hired some very handsome men to help usher all of you in and serve you drinks. But here we are in a pandemic. And so can you walk us through the holy steps of writing the story and having it published in The New Yorker?
Yeah, so that story, the story out there, does it sound okay? Is it too loud? Okay. I think I wrote a version of it originally in 2016, kind of as a very short story, and it was just like a throwaway thing that I just wrote a draft of and put aside. I think at a time when I was doing some online dating myself and feeling like everyone was kind of interchangeable and like some of them might be bots and I wouldn't know and it wouldn't really matter. And so yeah, it was, that version was a lot more just kind of bare bones and comic. And then in 2019, I actually, I had tried to sell a novel and it didn't sell. And so I was feeling really down about that. And then I just wanted to write like a new short story. And so I went back to it and I tried writing it from like a more grounded and somewhat autobiographical in certain respects way, and but still, yeah, with the basic idea of like a woman dating someone new and trying to figure out if he's a real man or a blot, and then realizing that maybe it's disappointing either way.
And so when you were working on it, was it something that you considered submitting to workshop, or this was like by yourself, and then when you...
Yeah, so it was actually the first story I workshopped at the Stegner program. So at least one person here read it in that first form, which is actually pretty close to the form it ended up in. And then, I submitted it to The New Yorker and definitely didn't expect anything to come from that, because I had submitted anything I could to The New Yorker basically over the years. And so.
I thought it was so refreshing that they published it. And so can we hear a bit from it?
Yeah, sure. So I figured this was probably the story that that people here might have read already out of anything in the book, but I just wanted to read to kind of set up for later stuff, just a short passage from toward the beginning. The early blots had been easy to identify. They were too handsome, for one thing. Their skin was smooth and glowing, and they were uniformly tall and lean, jawlines you could cut bread with. They were the best-looking men in any room and had no sense of humor. I met one of these early blots several years ago. My friend Peter had invited me to a dinner party hosted by a tech founder he'd grown up with in the Sunset District, and with whom he'd once followed the band Fish around the country, selling nitrous poppers to concert-goers. Peter and I didn't really hang out, beyond the meetings we attended in church basements for people who no longer drank. But I was bored, and it was a free dinner, and Peter made it sound like he'd already asked a bunch of other people who'd said no, which shook some of the pressure off. At dinner, I sat next to a guy named Roger. He had the telltale blot look, high forehead, lush hair, shapely eyebrows, but I didn't recognize him for what he was, because the blot phenomenon hadn't yet been exposed. Roger was solicitous, asking about my family, my work as a teacher, and my resentment toward the tech industry. When I declined the server's offer of wine, Roger's golden eyes flared with recognition, and he asked if I was in recovery. I said yes, for 5 years at that point, and he nodded gravely, saying he admired my commitment to this lifestyle. His dear aunt was also sober. Roger seemed eager to charm, but I was not charmed. I felt spotlighted by his attentiveness, his anticipation of what I might want. Another helping of fava bean salad, more water, an extra napkin when I dropped a chunk of braised pork on my skirt. I would say something self-deprecating, and he'd regard me steadily and assure me that I was a wonderful person, deserving of all I wanted from life, which wasn't what I'd been asking for. Roger didn't know me and wasn't a credible judge of my worth, unless his position was that all people had worth, which made him no judge at all. When I shifted the subject to him, he supplied a backstory that seemed pre-written. I came from ranch land in the northern United States, he told me. My father was stern but loving in his way. My mother is a wonderful woman who raised the four of us into strong, capable adults. My childhood was not without hardship, but these adversities shaped me into the person I am today. Now I live in the San Francisco Bay Area, land of innovation and possibility. I am grateful for the life I've been given, and I know it is thanks to the people who have loved and supported me on the journey. I forced a chuckle of acknowledgement. Wow, I said, that's great. As I drove Peter back to the Richmond district in my decrepit Corolla, he revealed that his friend, the event's host, had sprinkled the dinner party with blots. Blots? It's an acronym for something, Peter said. They're biomorphic humanoids, the latest advancement in the field of tactile illusion. He paused. Fake people, he added. I concealed my shock, not wanting to give Peter the satisfaction. So you invited me to be the subject of a Turing test for some company's new product without compensation? I said. You got a free dinner, didn't you? Well, he was boring, I said, and too handsome. I hate guys like that. Handsome guys? Yeah, I'm not attracted to them. Peter said he hoped I'd written all this on the comment card that had been distributed with the gelato, which asked me to rate my dinner companion's various attributes. I'd given Roger all 5s, out of habit, and in retrospect, I was glad not to have aided the blot revolution with my honest feedback. I'll stop there.
I'm so glad we got a taste of your sense of humor that obviously family and friends and new friends will find out more about. What I do find really, piercing about your sense of humor is that it kind of allows for a lot of these vulnerable moments of like revelations of insecurities, uncomfortableness, awkwardness, and also like just really petty shit, that your characters do. And so I think what inspires you about these uncomfortable moments, and how do the non-naturalist elements intensify those moments for you? Like, I guess, how do you pair them up and think about them in your stories, and especially here?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's not something I try to do deliberately, but it's just kind of the way I see the world, or there's just so much of my kind of perspective that it's filtered through. So yeah, I figure like if there were blots in the real world, they would probably be beta tested in San Francisco, and it would just be like, it's another thing we have to deal with. I don't know, now there's blots. So, I guess like dealing with the speculative elements and having suddenly some otherworldly thing going on or a new technology that's being kind of tested on us, it's like, I feel like people would have that sense of resignation and just like, this is another thing.
Yeah, I feel it like, that's the funny part. It's like, oh, well, here we are again. And then the men just do not catch a break in the earlier stories, I feel. But also it's like so recognizable, these really intimate moments of trying to be accepted and loved, maybe figuring out that way too. How do you know, I guess, when you're writing to go there? And then also, the editing process, once you've sort of written those moments out, when it's completed.
Yeah. Well, I guess the men don't fare well in that story, but I don't think the narrator really does either. Like, I think she's pretty insufferable, and we're hearing it through her voice, right? But, she's, like, very difficult to please. She's just, like, unhappy with everything. She's, I guess, relatable for me. But, so I feel like that's part of the story, right, is that this guy she's dating is kind of mediocre, but this is also through her perspective, so maybe that's maybe it's saying more about her than it is about him too. But yeah, in terms of what was the question about editing? Or
like how do you know when it's done, especially when you're adding, I think, speculative elements to also very poignant emotional arcs for the characters?
I don't know, I mean, How do you know when it's done? I feel like, well, it definitely helps to get feedback, and so it helped to workshop this a lot. And I think actually the original ending of the story, like in the version of the story now, it's like at the very end, she walks through Golden Gate Park and sees like a group of blots sitting at a picnic table playing cards, and they look so happy, and she goes toward them. And in the original version of the story, I think it was just like she moved past them, and then I think people in workshop were like, what if she goes toward them? And so it'll be, I don't know, I think getting some input from other people to see, because often I think it's just like a little tweak that totally changes like the inflection of the story or of where we imagine it going. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, I feel like revision is such a tough thing. Like for me, I kind of just need to like write a first draft and then step away from it and let it sit for like a few months if possible, and then come back to it with fresh eyes as if I didn't write it. And that's kind of the only way I can get a handle on it. But yeah, I never wanted the speculative elements to be really like foregrounded. And I definitely don't want to go too much into them in the stories, because like I have no idea how anything works, or like anything with technology, or even with like sci-fi tropes. I'm not sure. So I'm just like feeling it for myself, but I couldn't really explain it. So yeah.
I mean, obviously I have this background knowledge of the story being workshopped and being encouraged to continue. And so what was that process like to be asked to actually see it through, I think, the speculative elements for the creation of Big Sur?
Oh, yeah. So the way the collection is put together is, it's bookended by these two blot stories. So Out There, and then Big Sur is the final story, and it's the longest story in the book. And so that came to be because in our workshop, Adam Johnson told me like, yeah, this is okay, but maybe there's like potential for more from the blots. And he, I think, didn't like how the blots were mediated through the narrator's memory, and thought like, what if we meet the blots on their own terms? And I agreed with that, but I didn't want to overhaul Out There, because I liked the story kind of as it was. So instead I just wrote a second story in the universe of the blots. And in this one, in Big Sur, it's third person, and it's told through the points of view of both a woman named Meg and a blot named Roger, who she starts to date, who isn't necessarily the same Roger as in Out There, but he's maybe like the Roger, like the model of blot.
The one we couldn't hire to come tonight? Yeah.
I wish.
Would you like to read from Big Sur?
So I thought I would read from Big Sur, starting with just a little of Roger's point of view. So, let's see. This one. Roger returned to the room he shared with Steve. Their company had rented out the top floor of an SRO on 6th and Mission. 10 of them lived on this floor, 2 in each room, sleeping on twin beds pushed against the walls. Roger opened his door and found Steve inside, ironing his best shirt. He had a date tonight, which was why he'd been excused from attending the dinner party. Did you locate this woman on a dating app? Roger asked. Yes, Steve said, on Hinge. Her name is Marissa. She is a beautiful woman. I have high hopes for our date. I have high hopes for you too, Roger said, though he was sad to think that Steve might have success where Roger had failed. Success meant Steve would vanish to Big Sur, as the others had before him. Roger would soon have a new roommate, someone who looked a lot like Steve, but who was not Steve. How was the dinner party? Steve asked, sitting on the edge of his bed and buttoning his shirt. Roger sat on the edge of his own bed. It was a wonderful dinner, Roger said. I met many interesting people, including a woman named Meg. Steve's eyes flared with ardor. What a beautiful name, he said. She is a remarkable woman, Roger said. Did you secure her phone number? Yes, I will send her a text message soon. It would be wise to wait a day or two. I agree, Roger said, annoyed that Steve felt the need to tell him this. Steve stood. I must leave for my date, he said. I wish you luck, Roger said. Thank you, Steve said. Roger stood, and they embraced. Alone in their room, Roger lay on his bed and looked up at the ceiling, which was flaking in a pattern that reminded him of starry summer nights from his childhood. He thought about Meg and looked again at the digits she had entered into his phone, numbers corresponding to a human woman who could relieve him of his burden. His body flooded with a familiar ache. Roger was not quite tired, so on his phone he performed one of his favorite Google image searches, woman in hat. The grid of photos displayed women of all nationalities and of various ages, though most, Roger observed, were young. They wore many different styles of hat. Wearing the hat seemed to gratify them. A feeling of peace overtook Roger as he looked at the hatted women. He closed his eyes. He dreamed, as always, of Big Sur. Okay, now I'll read the next section okay, this is now Meg. Meg saw the text on her lunch break. Good morning, smiley face, the text read. This is Roger, who sat beside you at the dinner party. How are you feeling today? Please describe your emotional state. Meg squinted at her phone screen. Again, the eerie feeling washed through her. She was reminded of Words with Friends games she used to play with strangers who attempted to engage her in flirtatious conversation, often calling her dear. They usually seemed to be older men from distant countries, but sometimes she suspected they were bots. She would have thought Roger was a bot too if she hadn't already met him in person. I'm feeling fine, she wrote. I'm at work. Roger responded immediately. At the eye bank, where you dissect human eyeballs in exchange for an hourly wage? Meg wondered if he was making fun of her. Yeah, she wrote. How are you? Roger replied with a picture of a beagle. I have just encountered this dog in a local park, he wrote. I think it is very cute. Do you like dogs? Sure, Meg wrote. I love dogs, Roger replied. I love all animals. I would never hurt one deliberately. Meg was often amazed by how bad men in the Bay Area were at texting. She was bored by this exchange, but intrigued by the idea of fucking Roger. She had not expected him to contact her, assuming his request for her number was part of a pickup artist regimen. He was absurdly attractive in a conventional way she'd always found repellent, assuming men who looked like him had no hope of being decent, not to mention the fact that they'd never been interested in her. Roger, though, seemed different. His childlike submissiveness hinted at a certain depravity they might enjoy together. She imagined having sex with Roger, issuing commands until she'd had her fill of him, and then telling him to leave. So are you going to ask me out on a date? She wrote. A few minutes ticked by, and Meg figured she'd scared him off. Oh well, she thought, picking at her salad. Her fingertips still smelled of the vinegar solution in which the eyes were preserved. But then Roger's reply lit up her phone screen. Oh, Meg, I would be honored to take you on a date. It would be my life's singular pleasure. Meg took a screenshot of their exchange and texted it to her roommate, Genevieve. That freak from last night, she captioned. Wow, Genevieve replied. What a thirsty boy.
So we must discuss Roger's obsession with hats. Where did that come up? How?
I don't know. It just seemed right. It seemed like what Roger would be into, like dogs and just happy women wearing hats.
And how did that play in the sort of cultivation and creation of his voice? Because I feel his voice is so unique and yet so fitting.
Yeah, it's like very formal. It's, I guess, like I've had limited experience like communicating with AIs, but just from like a customer service bot that you're like chatting with or something, and that kind of very polite but stilted language. Or one time I downloaded an app that was like an AI wellness bot that will like tell you what you should do, like drink more water and stuff. And so I was like texting with that bot, but they texted back like immediately, the same way Roger does, which is really disconcerting. It's like I would say one thing and it was like an answer right away, and so I lost interest like immediately.
You're like, I don't need those shoes.
Yeah.
I don't need my bathroom fixed.
Yeah.
I think one of the beautiful things in this collection too are all the sort of landmarks and sceneries of the Bay Area included in it. And so what is Big Sur, I think, to you, and then also obviously to Roger? Yeah.
Well, I thought it was funny because Big Sur is kind of like, it's one of those Instagrammable places that's like, oh, we're going on our first weekend trip to Big Sur, and it's because it's like close enough to the city that it's kind of manageable as a long weekend, and everyone goes there, but also there's no service there, so the blots are programmed to take their mark there after a few weeks of dating, so that they then steal all their data in the middle of the night and then vanish in a cloud of lavender-scented mist. And yeah, and then the woman who they brought there, wakes up and the guy's gone, and then she doesn't know, though, that she's been defrauded until hours later when she's like back in service or whatever. So that's part of the scheme, but it's also, there's something very like mysterious and romantic and a bit sinister, I think, about Big Sur. It feels very, it feels like the middle of nowhere when you're there, and it's just like that one road along the cliffs, and it has kind of a gothic feel, I guess, of very moody, similar to San Francisco, but even more so maybe.
And
it's
like
foggy.
that pool that you can swim at naked at like 2 a.m. or something.
Oh yeah, like Esalen or whatever.
How did you organize and structure the stories, the other stories too in this collection?
Yeah, so that was challenging. So I put together like different versions of a collection over the years, and this one is a more curated version of like a previous story collection that I put together, where I was just throwing every story I'd ever written together, like, oh, this is a book, right? And so this was a lot more deliberate, and I tried to choose stories that felt cohesive, not even necessarily like thematically, but in terms of like an atmosphere or a feeling. And somewhat thematically also, but yeah, I knew that the two Blot stories would be the bookends, and then the Bone Ward is another long story that's kind of in the center.
Yeah,
and that's
I
like
love
that. Yeah. And so the Bone Ward is like the darkest point of the collection, probably, because it's about it's about these people whose bones melt at night and then reconstitute in the morning, and it's like a love triangle type story, and it's like this person does something really bad in order to like get what she wants. And so I was thinking of like the emotional trajectory of the book as being going from seeking to finding. So in the first half, like the characters are kind of like listless and bored and passive, and things are happening to them, and they maybe want something, but they don't know what, and they don't really get it in the end, and it's kind of open-ended. And then the Bone Ward is like the darkest point of that. And from there it starts to like lift up again toward the light, basically, and characters do start to find what they're looking for, even if it wasn't what they thought they were looking for, even if it's like a house that they have to moisturize with lotion constantly or something. Like they do find some kind of fulfillment or connection, and then ending with Big Sur, which is like the love story in the book, I guess. So
I feel it's like so heartwarming to see. I know Evan mentioned it too. It's like some of the shorter stories, or the stories that are also in this collection, have been worked on for years and read at so many different readings in the Bay Area.
Yeah.
And I feel like the themes that come up, or at least the imagery for me, it's like there's a lot of houses, dismembered bodies, lonely
Organs.
people isolating themselves in lonelier places. And I think all that, all of that is also part of this book. What, I guess, how can we get a sense of how you put something together in a way that sort of punches our gut? Because I think those are the stories that, those short, it's like so piercing about like this wanting and desiring connection and wanting to be seen.
For the shorter stories,
Yeah.
they're just... Yeah, well, it's interesting you mentioned like reading series, because I feel like Evan talked about like Quiet Lightning or other reading series, and that was really like formative for me too when I was writing short stories and living in San Francisco, and some of the shorter pieces in the book, like I kind of wrote to be read live, and so they're more voice driven and with more attention to like the rhythm of the sentences and that kind of thing. Whereas the longer stories are more just like traditional short stories to be read. But yeah, I don't know. I guess I just have like a sick sense of humor and like interest in things, and I'm just like on Wikipedia late at night, delving into things I shouldn't be probably, and that, yeah. But there's also, a lot of the stories are about like houses, but also about kind of body horror and like the the horror of living in a space that seems to be like turning against you, but also like the body as a space that's kind of turning against people in the book, and just yeah. So I think that those are always things that have interested me, and
your
yeah,
Google
there's
search,
a lot of
your Google browser is all arms.
Yeah, perhaps. I mean, I didn't mean for there to be so many house stories in here, but there are. I think there's like 4 that you could put in that category. So.
Would you like to read from one? Maybe
sure. Yeah. So this will be the final reading. So I thought I would just read one of those shorter pieces. It's called "The Head and the Floor." To be honest, things weren't going so well even before the head started coming out of my floor. I was unemployed and universally hated thanks to some choices I'd made. Afternoons, I'd go sit in this median strip a few blocks from my apartment and write things in my notebook while cars barreled past. Sometimes I brought a guitar. First, it was just a soft patch. I figured maybe, the floor was rotting. What did I know about floors? I thought of men I could text to ask them about this, bruise in my floor. I was a little hard up in terms of people to text because, well, like I said. First, I texted this guy, Lee. I texted Lee saying there's a soft spot in my floor, and could he come over and check it out? Does he know something about floors? When he came over, Lee was wearing a nice shirt and, product in his hair, maybe even cologne. Lee pressed his fingers into the soft spot in my floor. Then he kind of, recoiled and said I should call my landlord. I wasn't going to do that. I've lived in this apartment 6 years, and never once have I called the landlord. One of my windows won't open and another won't close. The toilet appears to be eating itself. The lock on my door is broken sometimes. Sometimes I'm trapped in my apartment for days until the humidity drops and I can slide the deadbolt out again. Lee asked if I wanted to, watch a movie, and I said no, and he looked sad but said okay. He left and I put a towel over the soft spot in my floor. After a few days, I could no longer deny that the towel was bulging up in the middle. So I peeled it back, and there was, the top of a head, with straight brown hair. It was cresting, when they talk about the baby's head poking out of the woman. It was the same thing, but, my floor. I texted this guy, Chris, and was like, hey, Chris. So Chris came over. He also seemed sort of a little bit more dressed up than the last time I saw him, though to be honest, I don't remember when that was or who Chris even is. He brought pizza, so I'm like, that's cool. Better than Lee. Lee didn't bring anything. When he saw the top of the head, Chris, well, you could tell he wasn't expecting that. He brought his tools, too. I didn't mention that. Both pizza and tools. Way better than Lee. I asked Chris to touch it, to see if it was warm. He said he didn't want to. I said this is why I asked him to come over. This is what I needed him for. So Chris looked like he was going to throw up or collapse in upon himself like a dead star due to the sudden revelation of the harrowing absurdity, futility, pain, of existence. He laid the towel carefully over the head. I thought you just wanted to hang out, he said. He sounded wounded. He took the pizza with him. So at this point I was starting to regret that everyone hates me and how all I do all day is sit in the median, this 3-foot wide strip of grass between 6 lanes of traffic, and pretend I'm writing in a notebook or pretend I'm playing guitar. Pretty soon I'd run out of guys to text to come over and help me with the human head coming out of my floor. The towel helped. I'm not going to sit here and tell you the towel did nothing. The last number in my phone of a man who did not yet know me well enough to hate me was Brandon, who I probably went on some sort of date with at some point in my life. I think Brandon said we should hang out again, and I was like, yeah. And then when he named an actual day of the week, I never responded and deleted all our texts. Brandon didn't bring anything, and he seemed annoyed. I wasn't sure why he came, but I was glad to have him there when I lifted the towel. You could just make out the upper edge of the eyebrows. Brandon agreed. It was a man's head. You could tell. It's not just because of the size. I'm saying, you can tell. I asked Brandon if he'd touched the top of the head to see if it was warm, meaning alive. Brandon said no. I said someone has to. He said it's your floor. I gave him this look. He sighed and told me how we went on a date 4 years ago. I was really rude. I tried to remember this date. I remembered lots of other dates, but none of those guys' faces looked like Brandon's, not really. I felt like I could grab Brandon's wrist and put his hand on the head before he realized what was happening. Then would know. I told Brandon I was sorry, even though I couldn't remember this date we supposedly went on. Well, I said, would you want to stay here with me while the head rises out of my floor? Of course, I expected him to say no. Any normal person would abandon me to this horror that is, after all, my burden and no one else's. Or tell me to call the landlord, which, that's off the table. But Brandon got this look like of utter defeat and sighed again and went, yeah, okay. So I broke my median routine, and now I stay in the apartment with Brandon all day. We mostly ignore each other. He works on his laptop because he's a freelancer. I don't know what kind. He told me, but I guess I didn't care. Sometimes I look over at him and wonder what fundamental and overpowering sadness there is inside of him that compels him to stay here with me while the head rises from my floor. But I'm not going to say anything because, what if he leaves? It's been 5 days since Brandon joined me. The head continues to rise. We lift the towel every 2 hours to check on it. It's rising at the rate of around a quarter inch per day. So by 6 a.m. tomorrow, there will be the eyes. This is like what it's all been building up to. We're excited, but we also feel like maybe it's too late now. Maybe before someone could have done something. Something could have been done. The eyes are blue and alert. They're blinking at what you might call normal intervals. I mean to say they're alive, looking at us. They seem like they're in an okay mood, not tortured at least. That's a relief. That answers at least one of our questions. Now that we have the eyes, we feel like we can talk to the head like we're all in this thing together. Hey buddy, we say, how's it going? We only ask to be polite. The head can't respond because its mouth is still on the floor, if it even has a mouth. Sometimes we tell the head stories about our lives. When the head gets bored of our stories, its eyes close and we stop. We don't put the towel back over the head. It seems like now there's the matter of human rights. We figure it'll be a few more days and there'll be the mouth, and then we'll clear some things up. All along, I've been hoping it'll be 6 months and then the whole man is up out of the floor. I imagine he's wearing a suit and he'll straighten his tie and shake my hand and walk out my door and the floor will kind of neatly seal up after him. So I won't have to tell my landlord after all or adjust in any small way the constituents of this miserable life that is after all my burden and no one else's. But days pass and it's still just the eyes and they're always awake and staring at me and Brandon unless we're standing behind it. It isn't rising anymore, the head. It's stuck. Or maybe that's all there is. Maybe it's been just the top third of a head all along. After a few weeks, we put the towel back over the head. Since then, it's been a few more months. Brandon seems to live with me. I've started going out to the median strip again. I don't know. We don't really talk, me and Brandon. We've never touched each other. At first, I thought he wanted to, but now I'm not really too sure.
Are you excited to see this on TV?
The head in the floor?
Yes. How is that process going with writing for the TV show?
Yeah, so the TV show that I've been developing is based on the 2 Blot stories, and it's been really cool. It's I'm writing the script with Sharon Horgan, who's a very experienced TV writer and actor and just amazing person, and she's also very funny, and that's her background is kind of this comedy that has a lot of emotional depth to it, and so I think it's kind of a perfect match that way. But yeah, it's been an interesting process of doing that, and I kind of have to just think of them as 2 separate things because writing screenplays is so different from writing fiction, and I feel afraid to stay too long in that space because then I feel like I won't be able to write fiction anymore. But
No.
I don't know.
Who do you feel when you're writing fiction that your work is in conversation with, or that you really enjoy also reading and fueling your work?
Yeah. Well, I love Kafka and Shirley Jackson, and then more contemporary Karen Russell and George Saunders, and then when I was younger, I read a lot of R.L. Stine, the Fear Street books, not the Goosebumps, because they were big serious novels, right? And so I think it was always kind of my favorite books, that type of horror books, and the X-Files was really formative for me too, as a young person. So all of that. I mean, I just kind of absorb whatever I'm watching and reading. Yeah.
Should we take
Yeah,
audience questions?
See if there's any questions.
Yeah. Now that we've mentioned Fear Street.
Fear Street. I wonder if they sell that here.
man in the front. No, it's kidding. I think he's bringing it.
Oh.
I unfortunately can't make it all the way to the front, so if you have a question, just right here. Yeah, thank you.
Do you consider yourself like a comedic writer because your work is really funny?
Oh, thank you for that question.
Thank you.
No, I don't. I mean, I think things are only funny when they kind of like arise naturally. I don't know. It's really hard to like be funny on purpose, I think. For me at least. So yeah, but I think kind of this type of material, like especially the stories that are just kind of ridiculous, like The Head on the Floor, you know, it just lends itself to humor because it's so absurd and over the top. And but yeah, humor is really important to me in writing, and I think that's one of like the best things it can do is be funny, but also you know, touching in some way or emotionally affecting in some way.
Another question? I can make it most of the way to you.
Can I yell it out from here? Is that
I'd prefer if you...
okay? All right.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I'm just wondering what's the hardest part of being a writer for you, and if this question makes any remote sense. Like, how do you deal with the existential angst of being a writer when it's not going unbelievably perfectly, and how do you push through those moments?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know. I mean, I think for me, like the great part about writing and also the hard part is that it is kind of like completely up to me. Like it's just something I'm working on by myself, and there isn't really a deadline or anyone looking over my shoulder, and that's great and very freeing. But I think it can be easy to kind of lapse into just not writing or feeling like, especially now, like I'm working on a novel, and so that when I haven't been working on it for a while, the thought of getting back into it just feels like so daunting and like the last thing I want to do. And then once I do get into it, it gets easier. But yeah, I think that when I'm feeling that way, it just helps to break it down into really small pieces. Like if I can just say like, well, if I write for half an hour today, or if I'm just like in the document for half an hour today. And I always like to time myself writing too, for some reason. I don't know why. It just helps me feel like I am like controlling time or something. But yeah, because I think I can start thinking of writing as like I have to be writing like 4 to 6 hours a day or something, or else it's not worth it and I'm not a writer. But yeah, so when I get into that space, it's easy to just not write at all. And so I try to just set small goals, just be in the world of the writing as much as possible.
I think you had such a beautiful essay in Lit Hub about journaling every day, like, and you talk more about that, right? Because it's like it is in part a practice, and yet fulfilling in a different way, right? Because you're not having to produce something so much.
Yeah. So I just journal like 1,000 words in a Word document every day, every morning, and it doesn't have to be anything as long as it's 1,000 words, and that I think that helps to keep things like lubricated or whatever.
Moist.
Yeah.
Lotion.
Keeps it all moist.
Yeah.
Gentleman in white.
So I'm going to ask about the journaling. Do you find that as you accumulate the 7,000 words or so a week, do you draw on the journal entries for stories? And if so, do you actually take entire passages, or is it just a general sort of thing?
Yeah, I think I keep it pretty separate for now. I think in the back of my head, I have like a sense that maybe it'll be useful for a project in the future or something, but it's definitely its own separate thing. And then like the novel I'm writing is in first person, and that's a very different voice. But I do, when I'm like working on the novel a lot, I do find that the journal's voice is like the novel, and that sort of happens with whatever I'm reading too. If I'm reading if I'm really like immersed in a book, I'll start to, or if I'm reading like Elena Ferrante, and I'll have like suddenly so many comma splices like constantly and like really long sentences. And so, I feel like I try to keep it separate, but everything kind of seeps into each other. Sure.
Are you going to save the journals for your eventual biographers?
Yeah, I don't think I'll have a biographer, but you never know. I hope not. I mean, I think, yeah.
Who else? Who next?
Hi, I'm Abby. I'm the girl that DM'd you on Instagram.
Hi.
So my question is, do you feel like your voice is still evolving, or do you feel like you've reached a point at which like you know your voice and how you write, or is that just like a journey that you're continually on?
Yeah, I think it's definitely a journey. I mean, and I think that the voice is different for every project, and I mean, I think that I've gotten a lot better at knowing like what interests me as a writer and what I want to write about, because for a long time I was kind of just trying to like mimic what other people were doing maybe, or write in like a more just straight realistic vein or something, and I felt like it didn't end up being very good. And it was when I started really, just like dialing into what I found exciting to be writing about, that then things seemed to like have more life on the page. So I think it's a process though, and I'll probably look back at what I've written, in 10 years and cringe at it, I imagine. It's like for all writers, right? It's like constant evolution. So yeah.
There was someone who had a question.
Oh, was there a hand up over here?
Yes.
Oh, hi.
Hi, Kate. One of my favorite things about your work is how you pick the locations. Could you talk, and especially the way that you portray San Francisco, could you talk a little bit about maybe like your favorite thing about writing about this area and how you go about picking the specific locations for the stories?
Yeah, I mean, I'm originally from Iowa. I used to write stories about Iowa once I had moved away from Iowa. And then now it's like I've been away from Iowa for long enough that I don't even really remember what Iowa is like. And so that's out. And and I've been in San Francisco since 2008. And so I think it's just kind of it's like when I have dreams, they're like set in San Francisco. So that's just kind of the default now. And I don't know. I think there's something about this area too, like going like up north and being in like Point Reyes, or like hiking and being in all that nature, that I think is really evocative and cinematic in a way. And San Francisco too, with like the way it's like cold here all the time except today, and it'll be cold here and hot everywhere else, and it's like foggy, and I think that San Francisco really lends itself. And then there's the whole like the tech industry and like the extreme inequality and social issues here, and all of that kind of dystopian elements that also I think lend themselves especially to like speculative or sci-fi. I think San Francisco has always been like a really rich ground for fiction and writing.
I kind of had the same question, but slightly differently, of like, you also have these sort of like road trip stories, like to Tahoe or to like Joshua Tree or Big Sur, or like these kind of getaways. And it seems like there's like an essence of place, or like it's part of the alchemy of the story, this like experience of this specific place. Do you go hunting for, like, when you travel, are you like, I'm going to write a story about this? Or I don't know, how does that all play into the Kate story?
I would like to add also the Corolla appears to be taking the Kate story to its most Kate-ness.
Yeah, the Corolla is presently in the Richmond, relaxing, but. And I thought you were asking, do you go hunting? And I was like, oh, that's interesting. No, but I don't know. I mean, I think, Yeah, probably it is just. I think when I wrote Tahoe, the story. So there's a story called Tahoe in the book about this guy is like recalling a bachelor party from years ago where they ended up like killing a man, but that's not what he's focused on. He's like trying to remember all these mundane details about it. And he just slips in that they like killed this guy. I think I don't even know if I'd been to Tahoe at the time when I wrote the story. I think I had just heard about Tahoe from people, going skiing or whatever, going to Tahoe. So I think I didn't even know what it was. I just like heard about it, and then I probably like looked it up and was like, Lake Tahoe is super deep. Things are preserved down there forever, and so yeah. But I think I guess it is just all part of this like California mythology, maybe, that yeah, it's like all these places are really cool to write about. I mean, Iowa is cool in its own way, I'm just thinking about that because that's where I'm from, but it's not really the same level of drama, I feel, just in like the landscape itself. So yeah.
Kate, so on the theme of hunting, so you mentioned earlier downloading like a app so you could chat with a bot, right? Mm-hmm. And I was thinking about your piece in the New York Times Magazine about watching videos at night of abandoned malls, night after night, I think. So I think my basic question is, why do you do that stuff? And in the back of your mind, is it thinking this could potentially be in the future for writing purposes?
Yeah, no, I never think about anything in that smart of a way. I mean, it's just like what I'm drawn to, especially like late at night when I just like it's like I don't have the motivation to like watch a TV show. It's like I'm just in that state of like just wanting to watch videos of dead malls or whatever. But I don't know, I guess it's like I read about in that essay, it's like uncanny, right? And especially the malls, because yeah, I think lately, and I'm older than I've ever been, right? Like we all are, and so I feel more and more drawn to nostalgia and like remembering, like the 80s and 90s, and so seeing videos of malls that still have that kind of retro stuff preserved, but now it's abandoned, and it's just very like eerie. But I can like superimpose myself there as if I'm still there, and so it's a very, I don't know, just like a spooky, interesting thing for me. But the bot wasn't that great. It was just that was like uncanny in a different way of just like, oh, I know you're not real, like you have no life, you're just texting me immediately. So yeah, that didn't last very long for me. But who doesn't want to chat with a bot and get some tips on wellness or whatever?
Any other questions?
Other burning questions, you guys?
One
Bridget.
behind myself.
Hi, I'm wondering if you can tell us anything about the forthcoming novel that you've mentioned a few times.
So again, one person has read quite a bit of it. It's about a woman named Linda who really loves airplanes, and that's all I'll say about it for now. But she's really into them, and like commercial jets, and so and I was using Moby Dick as kind of a structuring scaffold at first, or like for the voice, which I know that it sounds like it doesn't make sense at all, but it does, and I can explain it maybe after. But yeah, so
That's for the next Q&A
yeah,
when that's out.
There's one more person who asked.
Oh yeah, of course. Is it,
So this is, I guess, a follow-up to the existential crisis question, which is kind of, how did you initially convince yourself, as like a person who's writing about a lot of kind of bleakness, how did you convince yourself like, the world needs this, I should publish? And then like follow through on that with like, I've been rejected, but they're wrong. Like, how?
I don't know. I mean, I don't think the world really needs any books, right? Like, I don't know. I mean, I guess I never thought about it that way, but I also don't really think of the book as that bleak, I guess. I just see it as more kind of like the stories that I was interested in telling and somehow reflective of like my experience as a person in the world today. And, you know, the world is really strange and bad in so many ways. So I feel like the fiction kind of starts to reflect the world. And yeah, I don't know. I mean, getting rejected is just like part of being a writer, I guess. And but I don't think I mean, it was rejected because it wasn't, I don't know why it was rejected. Who knows? But I guess I just kept going because it's like, well, what else am I going to do? Like, I know I'm going to keep writing, so I might as well keep trying and see if something sticks. And eventually it did, so.
Kind of like what Evan said for the next Q&A.
Yeah.
Like, we have to work to the next Q&A.
Yeah.
Right.
The next event. Well, I think you should be signing books.
Yeah, I'll
for
be signing
all friends
books.
and family. Again, thank you so much for coming out.
Yeah, thank you so much.